It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, everybody. I am Jeff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays, presented to you by Film Seizure. This week, taking a break a little bit from the spooky and the scary, and going to focus on what many consider to be one of the funniest movies of all time. This is Mel Brooks Young Frankenstein, which is from 1974. Now, Mel Brooks, a lot of people know who he is. Especially people of a certain age are going to appreciate a lot of his fantastic work over the years. But he was born in June of 1926. He was born as Melvin Kaminsky. And after World War II, he worked at clubs in the Catskills as a musician. He often played, I think it was piano and maybe drums as well. I can't remember. I think he played a little bit of piano, though. But he was friends with Sid Caesar, who was a pretty big comedian, or became one of the biggest comedians of the middle part of the 20th century. And Sid Caesar ended up hiring him to be a joke writer. And the big hit that happened was the transformative Your Show of Shows, which was a variety show that not only was it hosted by Sid Caesar, but Mel Brooks worked on that show with Carl Reiner, Neil Simon, and a lot of several big-time writers, particularly comedic writers. When that show was taken by Carl Reiner and kind of adapted, the behind-the-scenes stuff was adapted into the really, really popular Dick Van Dyke Show, Maury Amsterdam's character Buddy was based on Mel Brooks. And, of course, there's a whole thing you can go deeper and deeper into with the Dick Van Dyke Show and the stories that would be told about Sid Caesar and working on Your Show of Shows and everything like that. But after that, he and Carl Reiner moved on to be a bit of a pretty successful comedy duo in the 60s. One of their big acts was the 2,000-year-old man, who was Mel Brooks, who played a guy who witnessed Jesus's crucifixion and stuff. That's something that he has, over the years and over the decades, have he's resurfaced that character and continued to use that character. In fact, he won a Grammy for a comedy spoken word album in, I think, 1999 or 2000, which was the 2,000-year-old man in the year 2000. So that was a pretty big hit. But by the late 60s, he was kind of getting more into TVs and movies. And one of the things that was frustrating him a lot was how a lot of comedy was going more towards situational comedy. And he was getting pretty bored with that. He preferred to do things that were a little bit more madcap, a little bit more parody, a little bit more irreverence and stuff like that. And right in the mid-'60s, he helped develop the show Get Smart, which was basically a doofus James Bond. So it was kind of playing on that madcap kind of more farcical type of stuff, as opposed to the situational type of stuff. Every episode is going to be slightly different than the one before it, and what the characters would be doing, or what the smartness of the characters, or the lack of intelligence a character might have, and so forth. Well, he only really worked on that first season, even though he continues to get a lot of credit for the entire breadth of the series, but he only really worked on the first season. Well, he went into movies by the late 60s and made a movie called The Producers, which did have Gene Wilder, who's a big part of this too. But that ended up being kind of a send-up of idiots who are trying to produce a bad stage play, and it ends up it just ends up being just this this kind of farce about, the types of stuff that gets onto that happens behind the scenes with producing shows and so forth. And The Producers would be almost a timeless classic, which again, when he won a Tony in the early 2000s, it was because that was adapted into a very, very successful musical. So, that was just the kind of the beginning of the superstar that Mel Brooks is, that we know, that, or at least my generation knew of him, because that was really what launched his movie career well into the 70s. And speaking of, let's talk about 1974. 1974, Mel Brooks didn't just have Young Frankenstein, he also had one of the other funniest movies of all time, Blazing Saddles. Now, Blazing Saddles came out in February. It ended up becoming the second highest grossing movie of 1974. Young Frankenstein came out in December and finished third, just behind Blazing Saddles. Both movies got Oscar nominations for various things. So it's, like, for example, he got nominated for Best Original Song for the theme of Blazing Saddles, but he was also nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay for Young Frankenstein in the same Oscar award show. So that was a massive year for him. And while Blazing Saddles didn't get the critical acclaim at that time that it came out that Young Frankenstein did, the reason why Blazing Saddles has also been able to survive the years, and particularly with the jokes that it uses and the content that it uses, it's able to continue to be as successful as it is because of younger people really took to it. And it's something that it's kind of funny because I saw Blazing Saddles not that long ago at a Flicks Brew House when they were playing older movies, and the younger people that I was with didn't quite appreciate it the same way as I did, but it's also understanding that the time that it came out and the way that it was really poking fun at how really bad white people's opinions were of black people, and how the only intelligent person in the entire movie was the black sheriff and his buddy in it that ended up becoming friendly with him. So it was saying a lot about social issues and so forth. Now, Young Frankenstein is a completely different thing. Now, it was something that Gene Wilder wanted to do. It was something that he had kind of been tinkering around with in his head. And when he was trying to sell Mel Brooks on it, because what he really wanted to do was he wanted to write the story, he wanted to be in it. He didn't really think that Mel Brooks was really going to go for it, because he didn't know Mel Brooks to ever do anything that he didn't write himself. So he basically, when he was trying to sell him this whole idea, Mel Brooks wasn't all that interested in it. He, one of the things that he would say, it's like, I just don't want another family member. We've had the son of Frankenstein, we've had the brother-in-law of Frankenstein, we've had, the roommate of Frankenstein, all of these things. And, but what Wilder really sold him on was the idea that this was the grandson of the original Frankenstein scientist, and that he's embarrassed by the family legacy. And that started bringing Mel Brooks around to the idea of, there's comedy that we could have here. It's not just going to be derivative. We can actually do something with this. What's really fantastic is that this movie is kind of part remake, part sequel, and part parody of the old Universal Frankenstein series. In particular, the first four of the Universal Frankenstein movies: Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, and Ghost of Frankenstein. It's almost impossible to separate this movie from those four movies. They don't just feature a lot of the same sound effects, a lot of the same camera work. It also even looks like that it's filmed on the same type of film stock that would have been used in the 40s. It does not look like a 1974 movie. Now, granted, it is black and white, and that's not what I'm talking about. A black and white movie that comes out in 1970s is going to look a lot crisper than a black and white movie from the 1940s. A movie from the 2000s that was made in black and white is going to look different than a black and white movie made in 1974. So it really, and I believe that I've heard someplace that they did indeed find film stock that would have been contemporary to the time that the Frankenstein movies were coming out from Universal, and was using stuff like that. And I could be wrong on that, but I thought I heard that someplace. But in addition to that, there was a man by the name of Kenneth Strickfaden, who he basically had all of the Frankenstein equipment from the very first movie. So all of the lab equipment, all of the stuff that lets off electrical sparks and sounds, and all of the wall stuff that was used to lift the slab into the top of the castle, all of that was provided for this movie, and it really makes this movie look like the 1931 Frankenstein movie, which it's that way. That part of this movie is dealt with so much. It was so much reverence that it's amazing that I can't imagine a movie made these days where it was a joke on an older series of movies. I just don't feel like they would take the same reverence to basically recreate that laboratory set. But so they just perfectly match the Universal classics. Everything about this movie looks like that, and that's going to be one of my likes that I talk about later. But the basic plot of this movie, if you haven't seen it, what are you doing? You gotta see this movie, because I think this movie has a lot of timeless jokes. There are jokes that you may not be able to understand today, but the reactions that characters give to those various lines that may be a little bit outdated some 46 years later or 47 years later now is still reacted to so perfectly that they come off as funny because of how the other people react to that. But you have Frederick Frankenstein, who always wants to be called Frankenstein. Why he doesn't change his name, it's beyond me. He just wants to be pronounced a different way. But he's an American physician, and you see him at the beginning of the movie basically teaching a class, and he's having to deal with this kind of a brat of a student that keeps wanting to talk about his grandfather's legacy and all of that. But we find out that his great-grandfather has died, and as the final remaining Frankenstein in the family line, he hasn't inherited the estate in Germany. So he goes out there. He does have a fiance who is played by Madeline Kahn, and pretty much anytime you have Madeline Kahn in a Mel Brooks movie, she is just perfect in every possible way. She was also in Blazing Saddles, but she's kind of a debutante. She's very high society. She, like when they're saying goodbye, when you would normally expect two people who really love each other to kiss and hug each other, she doesn't want him to touch her. She doesn't want him to ruin her hair or her makeup because she's going to a party. She even dodges a blown kiss to her. It's pretty funny stuff, but. He goes to Germany, or to Transylvania is where they take him, and he meets his primary lab assistant, Igor, who upon learning that he does not, or that Frederick Frankenstein doesn't want to be called. He wants to be called Frankenstein instead of Frankenstein. Igor decides that he doesn't want to be called Igor. He wants to be called Igor. And there's a whole joke with Igor about the way he pronounces his name, how Frederick Frankenstein actually sticks to calling him Igor for the entire movie. He's a hunchback, but his hump shifts which shoulder it's on. That's something I did not realize until this very day that I watched this movie to record this episode. I think I've always missed the fact that his hump switches sides. He's played by Marty Feldman, and Marty Feldman's such a peculiar looking person because he's got bulging eyes that point in different directions, and he is wonderful as Igor. But he also meets his other lab assistant, which was assigned to him, which is Terry Garr. And Terry Garr is, of course, very beautiful, and she almost comes off as being an airhead, but she's also actually extremely capable. And there's all sorts of sexual innuendo with them. They go to the castle. He ends up finding his father's diary. He ends up deciding while reading the diary that what he once thought was insane and sick of his grandfather, he now realizes that it could very well work. He kind of gets prodded in that direction by his grandfather's old girlfriend, who's played by Cloris Leachman, who has a name that every time you say her name, the horses that are used on the carriage out front, Winnie, all of that sort of stuff. And it's just all these little jokes. More about that here in a minute. But he creates, he intends to put a very famous scientist's brain into his dead body that he and Igor have gone and gotten. But Igor fucks it up and ends up bringing him a abnormal brain, which of course makes the monster fragile and unstable. The monster gets free. It's becoming more and more obvious that this Frankenstein is just doing what every Frankenstein does, which is try to create a monster. There's a parody of a character from Son of Frankenstein, the chief inspector of the town that has the fake arm. That's played by Kenneth Mars in this, and of course that's played up to almost insane levels of parody and of comedic value, and in the end Frederick Frankenstein is able to bring a little bit of calmness and a little bit of intelligence and classiness to the monster, and is able to share some of his knowledge with the creature, which is it's one of those things I can't really go into every single part of this movie because this movie lives in the little moments, and I think at that point that's where I kind of need to leave the breakdown of this. This is a movie that's so wildly popular that if you're listening to this, I don't need to tell you what's going on in this movie. You're either here to find out what are the 3 things that I can pick about this movie that I love, or you just like the movie and you just want to hear somebody talk about it. Either which way, if you have not seen Young Frankenstein, it's almost required viewing for anybody who likes good things. If you don't like good things, then get the hell out of here. You don't want to watch this movie. But let's get to my 3 likes. First and foremost, it's got to be the cast. Gene Wilder was on such a string of successes at this time. In the 5 or 6 years that this that led up to this movie, he was in The Producers, he was Willy Wonka, he was in Blazing Saddles, he was in an extremely popular Woody Allen movie. These are all things that have carried with him for the rest of his life. He is just brilliant at being the frustrated doctor who's trying to escape his legacy, to being the frustrated doctor who's now finally fallen for the legacy and thinks he's succeeded or thinks he hasn't succeeded, then realizes that he does succeed, but it's not perfect. It's great. And of course, his monster is Peter Boyle, who most people would later get to know him as in Everybody Loves Raymond, as Ray Romano's father in that show. I'd already, and Peter Boyle has he almost perfectly matches the kind of movement and some of the expressions that Boris Karloff had in the part of the monster, but it's truly his own thing, and that's okay too. As I had mentioned before, you got Marty Feldman, who was in a handful of Mel Brooks movies over, well, especially in the 70s. He's playing Igor. He has this mischievous streak in him that makes him almost contentious to Dr. Frankenstein, but at the same time, he's just in it for the laughs, and he has these little moments where he breaks the fourth wall and kind of winks at the camera a little bit that is just so perfect. That's one of those things that can go horribly wrong if you don't do it right. And Marty Feldman does it so well because he's almost, despite him being a hunchback and despite him being disfigured and being this wacky character, he's almost our surrogate too. Because, he's like, hey, you get a load of this shit that you're watching on the screen. That's how you feel when you watch him, is that he's asking you those types of questions. And then, Cloris Leachman, who is just this very stern and strict German lady who is, she's, you don't think that she has any joy in her life, but you find out that she does. It's one of those things that where I'm not sure that Cloris Leachman will be remembered for anything other than playing Frau Blucher. And I think I just heard a horse whinny. Terry Garr is funny in her own right. She carries a lot of jokes very, very well. I mean, a lot of the sexual innuendo, a lot of the stuff that she's in almost every scene with Gene Wilder, and she is going toe-to-toe with him and being able to handle those jokes. Madeline Kahn is insane, as always. Kenneth Mars is this Inspector Kemp, who nobody can understand because he has such a thick German accent. And, of course, he's got the fake arm that is played to just ungodly amounts of farcical nature. It's everything about the cast of this movie works so perfectly with one another, and the way that they act together, you almost have to believe that they made this movie over the course of a year, where they're so in tune. You almost have to believe that they were all studying this together for ages before they actually went to screen with it. That's how comfortable these people are and how quick-witted they are back and forth. And that brings me to the second and that's the jokes. The jokes of this movie are unbelievably detailed in some cases. Some of them you can never explain to somebody who hasn't seen this movie, and they get the joke. They have to see it, and because it plays off of something that you saw 2 minutes before the joke lands, or something that is based around the type of character, like particularly with Marty Feldman's character. You can't explain why something he does is funny unless you see him play Igor. The only person whose jokes you could probably explain to their intended effect at the end to make somebody laugh is probably Gene Wilder, and yet he has got these jokes that range from little jokes that are a take on words, or that he says something in response to Terry Garr in her accent in this movie, or it's something very broad and very much lower brow. But he goes through that range, and that's the thing about these jokes. Whether it's just a small little joke that takes a couple of minutes for it to land, or it's a broad, almost slapsticky type of comedy beat, they all land almost the exact same level of laughter. And it's one of the movies that it's so very hard to find a joke in this movie that doesn't land. almost every comedy has one or two jokes that isn't quite as funny as other jokes or don't quite land the way that you want. This movie, I think it's impossible to say that about any of the jokes in this movie. That does, they all land the exact same amount of funny. They all work perfectly for the movie. It's just a wonderfully funny movie that sometimes it's one of those things where sometimes you hear somebody say, I laughed so hard I hurt, because every joke in the movie or every joke that the comedian told was hilarious. This is a movie that pretty much does the same thing. It's a mile a minute. Is throwing things at you that are visual, that are physical, that are spoken jokes. It's just all of it just lands so well. And then lastly for this, for my 3 likes, the aesthetic. It's so perfect. You watch this movie and you almost think that this movie is made entirely by people who made movies in the 30s and never changed. The camera work, I'm almost surprised that this movie is shot in what's called flat, which is I think 1.67 to 1 ratio. Whereas the older Frankenstein movies were shot in a square format, 1.33 to 1 ratio. And I think it was probably 1 to 1 back in the 30s. But you almost expected that to be how this movie was shot. The fact that this has any widescreen element to it is actually almost surprising, because outside of some of the establishing shots, there's no real need for this movie to be shot in a contemporary way. It could have been entirely made like it was in the 30s, and it would have still done what it needed to do. There are only a few jokes in the entire movie that takes advantage of the widescreen. But that said, the aesthetic, like I said, there were all of those props that were provided for them. The way that the camera is relatively static or doesn't have that many difficult shots that would not have been able to have been done in the 30s. The music sounds like something out of the 30s. The performances, the way that they're lit, everything about this movie makes you think that you're watching a Universal Classic Horror, part of their Universal Classic Horror cycle, when in fact it's a movie from the 70s that was distributed by 20th Century Fox. It's one of those types of movies to where if you are really going for an aesthetic, you better know what you're doing, because if you don't, you're going to fall flat on your face, because it's so similar to what it's trying to play up to. But it hits every single note perfectly, and it still is able to be contemporary and feel like a 70s comedy too. So with that, the aesthetic is the glue that helps hold all of this together. And of course, when you have somebody as whip smart with delivery as Gene Wilder, or is as funny at writing jokes or as good at directing comedy as Mel Brooks, you're going to end up with one of the all-time greatest comedies, one of the all-time best movies to do everything that it's set out to do. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday, and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday on filmseizure.com. And you can also find the podcast and the show in places where other fine podcasts are found, like SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Amazon, and Spotify. And additionally, you can hop on over to Facebook and Twitter to follow us by just searching for Film Seizure. And while you're over there, make sure to check out B-Movie Enema. You can go to B-Movie Enema's Twitter and Facebook page by searching for that. You can also head over to my website, which is bmovieenema.com. You can read new text articles each and every Friday from me. And if you want, on Saturdays, from now until the end of March, there will be new episodes for the episodic B-Movie Enema, the series. over on YouTube. Those episodes will be, for season 1, I should say, is ranging from January 2nd to March 27th. 2021, so you can come and watch a full movie with me on YouTube. Just head over to the website on Saturday evenings, or you can subscribe to the B-Movie Enema YouTube page by just searching for B-Movie Enema. So until next week, everybody, stay spooky.